Steve, do you want to introduce Derek, or do you want me to?
You can. I'm sorry, I just came to the door, so I'm just trying to find my questions and stuff.
All right, Lisa, it says we're live. Let's see. Oh, I see us.
Okay, so I'm gonna back out.
Yep, sounds good. Let's see. Sorry, Derek,
That's okay.
It always takes a second to get.
I was marveling at Lisa and everyone's ability to do this. I don't know how to do what you guys are doing. So
This is teaching now.
Yeah, that's right.
Okay, through as well. This is it.
But we're being really nice. We're not giving you a journal to work on while we're fixing it. You don't have any do now.
Yeah. You don't have to look at a slide with the music that I like.
All right. We are up now. We've got watch parties in every one of the SC for Ed groups and on the page and all over. So hello out there, Facebook world. Thank you so much for joining us this evening. I am Nicole Walker. I'm one of the board members for SC for Ed, and Steve Newsom, who is one of our directors, and I have the distinct pleasure of getting to speak with Derek Black. If you are following us on our social media, you've probably seen me blow up his name every day for the last couple of days. We are super excited about this opportunity. Derek is a professor at the University of South Carolina's Law School, and we are very lucky because he focuses on educational issues. So he's a great person for us to talk to in these times. In addition to that, he's actually just written a new book called Schoolhouse Burning, which examines the school choice issue and how it's affecting American education. So welcome, Derek. Did I get you right?
yeah, I mean, thanks Nicole and thanks Steve and Lisa Ellis for making this happen and probably others that I haven't spoken to. But I mean, first, it is just really my privilege to be here and talk with you guys. And I've told people, that, all out for May when everyone walked on the state capitol, I said, aside from, my children's birth, that was the sort of most exciting day that I've been part of in the last, 15 years. So, just really honored to be here and yeah, I mean, it's just special. So, and so excited to, be able to interact and answer some questions, add clarity. I know that, teachers under tremendous amount of pressure, unfair pressure, too often. And Lisa and I were talking a little bit about that earlier. But anyway, I won't go on. I just want to say it's a real honored and special opportunity for me. And so thank you so much for making this opportunity for me.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
And speaking to that, Facebook world, if you have questions, Lisa is monitoring the chat for us. She's hiding over there in the corner. So feel free to drop them into the Facebook space that you are watching in, and she will get those questions over to us. I want to start, though, Derek, with just hearing a little bit of an overview for those who haven't gotten to read the book yet. What are some of the essential points that you looked at in Schoolhouse Burning?
Yeah, I mean, the initial motivation for the book was just the privatization that's going on, but also just the way that we've changed the way that we talk about public education. So, push aside vouchers and charters for one moment, and all of you who've been in the business of education for more than a decade realize that teachers are talked about much differently than they were before, that politicians react to educational needs much differently than they had before. And so that was very troublesome for me. And so I began with, let's really look at these last 10 years or so. And I've been involved in litigation and expert testimony and both here and outside of South Carolina during that time. But as I began to sort of try to make sense of that story in a way that was accessible to everyday people, I said, these really aren't policy questions, right? And results and legal standards and, what's better or not better for kids. And I said, ultimately, if we begin down that road of whether this school is doing better than that one or this form of school or this voucher, you're actually asking the wrong question. Because when you look at the United States as a democratic project reaching back to, 1800, you realize it has always been about something bigger than test scores. And so I said, let me tell the story of making education right for regular people in America and see how that shakes out. And so, as I say in the book, America was a radical idea in 1776 that the world was ruled by kings and queens and elites then. And the idea that you would let regular folks like those of us on this call vote was a radical idea. And Alexander Hamilton's and Washington's and Jefferson's and Adams of the world said, my God, if we're going to let these folks vote, they've got to be educated. Mm-hmm. Otherwise, this thing might implode. And so I start with that story and then begin to work through the things that the country did very early on to make education a reality. But then I also move to the Civil War, which shows the failing of our democracy in so many obvious ways. I don't need to repeat them all today. But one of those, public education would take root sort of organically, but it needed help. And so following the Civil War, Congress mandated the southern states constitutionally obligate themselves to provide education for kids. And that's obviously because there were millions of new citizens, slaves who were going to be part of citizenry, and they needed education. They had been denied it. And then there was also, of course, lots of poor whites that weren't getting access to education at that moment in time either. And so, post-war is this sort of reformulation of our democracy. And then we could tell a similar story about the civil rights movement. But what I do from founding until today is to say, look, public education has been part of the expansion of our democracy since day one. Each time our democracy has expanded, public education has been part of that. By the same token, the two major periods in history when segregationists primarily and former slaveholders tried to move democracy backwards, they did it through education as well. Mm-hmm. And so that brings us to the modern day. And I say, look, this is the first time in history, actually. Well, I should say those prior attempts were really about the attempt to suppress African-American citizenship. So they weren't really trying to take away white citizenship. And so public education survived. What I say is different today is that there is a direct attack for the very first time in the history of this country on the concept of public education itself. And so just as that was an attack on the citizenship of African Americans, it is now an attack on the citizenship of all children who attend public education. And that the people who are pushing this agenda, they are the same people who are trying to restrict access to the ballot box. And so we have to understand this is a much bigger project to reshape our democracy. And so with all that said, this is a story as much as anything else that I try to give. And last thing I'll say, which I think is meaningful, I talk about my own experience in public schools. The book is dedicated to the teachers of Clinton High School who made opportunity for all a shot, made it real. And particularly for me, I don't come from a privileged family. There's more GEDs in my lineage than there are college degrees. And I say public education is the inheritance that we give to each generation, particularly for kids who cannot expect an inheritance in the traditional sense. And so I received that inheritance, and part of my work is trying to make sure that the kids that come after me can expect their inheritance too. So that's the overview of the book in the broadest sense. And then it talks about, how do we sort of get back to those core values at the end of the book as well.
Yeah, one of the things that you said, it reminded me of one question I was going to ask. In the last chapter, of the book you wrote, the last decade of the education debate and change represents something very troubling with our larger historical context. At the very highest level, it involves states reneging on constitutional commitments, principles, and structures that have been with them for a century and a half or more. And we got we were talking about some good news this week, but how would you put the Abbeville decision and the consequent sort of just failure to abide by that decision? How would you include that in that context? Or
I would. Let me first say something about the recent voucher decision. I'm sure, Nicole, I know Nicole has some questions. We'll come back to it. But I will say it really crystallizes, I think, a great deal of the book, which is this commitment to public education and public education being first, and the sort of prohibition on spending public funds in private institutions has been with our Constitution since 1868. And the fact that our governor, 150 years later would go, I want to give money to private schools and that's all that matters, and I'm going to fight it all the way to the Supreme Court, I think tells you something about how we are unhinging, or how our government is unhinging itself from these core constitutional commitments that go back a long ways. And, the great thing, I think I tweeted out the other day, is that, our state Supreme Court stood up for those long-standing principles that go all the way back. And so that reminds me of so much of what I say in the book about sort of the power of these commitments. At the same time, Steve, it's far from being a bed of roses here in South Carolina. And, we had two positive Abbeville decisions that seemed like it was pushing the legislature to try to move in the right direction. But the final one, or what is now the penultimate one, but the one before the final one, was a 3-2 decision. And, two of the people from that majority have left. And of course, Chief Justice Toll was replaced. And when she replaced, the composition of the court was changed. I don't blame the individual members. I almost blame the legislature, so that we have this, this odd, well, I wouldn't say odd, but our system is the legislature picks our Supreme Court justices. So we had a Supreme Court that had been stable for a period of time, insisting that our state live up to its obligations. And then during the confirmation process, there were questions asked about how you would have decided Abbeville differently. And so, that's very troubling, right? That you have the people who are picking members of the Supreme Court second guessing its prior decisions and letting that factor into their way of thinking. And then, Justice, I hate to call names given how small the state is, but Justice Kittredge in his more recent decision, not the voucher one. Hey, I give him full credit. He stood up for the schools in the recent one. But, he said, we're dismissing, any further litigation in Abbeville. It's just like I said in my dissent. And so I'm now in the majority and we're done with this. And so, I wrote an op-ed in the state newspaper that really took that decision to task, because the Constitution isn't supposed to change its meaning dramatically, at least, based upon decision of the legislature. We'll just put it that way. So, it is. We got a big victory on vouchers, but I will not say that I am optimistic about our ability to revive Abbeville type school funding litigation right now, unfortunately.
So let me ask, I guess, 2 questions about that. So when you spoke about that disconnect, where do you think the disconnect of that commitment to public education has come from? I mean, is it just a matter of power? And wanting to make sure that certain groups are in control, or is it something other than that?
Well, what I've been saying as I've talked about the book a lot, and what I've sort of come to my conclusions, is that the disconnect actually in my mind is primarily between the people who sit in the halls of power and the people who vote for them. I mean, in the book, I talk about these public opinion, or these surveys in the South about these are 2 or 3 years old now, but They took a demographically representative polling of all the southeastern states and asked them to identify, are you a Democrat or are you a Republican? And asked them, do you think the schools are adequately funded? Should your legislature, do something more about that? Series 5-6 questions. And I can tell you is that no more than 2 or 3 percentage points on most of those questions separated Democrats from Republicans, which is to say that, 80% of the people responding to those polls said, we've got a problem with public school funding and we want our legislature to fix it. So when we're talking about grassroots level folks, I don't think there's any disconnect, or at least there's not much between what we need to be doing. The problem is that folks are getting elected on other issues, right? Yeah. Or they're being funded by small, wealthy individuals who have their own agenda. Public education has been, by and large, a bipartisan issue for over 200 years. And so Democrats and Republicans could go to the ballot box and vote under the idea that I'm not actually voting on education issues. I'm voting on, police, or I'm voting on healthcare, or I'm voting on bridges, but I'm not really voting on education, because even Republicans, have some commitments. You look at school funding litigation, there's a lot of, Mike Huckabee, who is on, Fox News regularly talking about lots of stuff. Like Mike Huckabee settled a school funding lawsuit in Arkansas when he was governor and injected $400 additional million into public schools, right? And so it wasn't strictly this D or R issue. But what's different now is that it has become that. And that's actually a sign of democratic decay, is that we can't agree upon that, number one.
Yeah.
And then number two, part of the reason why we're not agreeing is because the elected representatives, again, are not reflecting, grassroots values. They're reflecting wealthy donor values. And so I think that is the problem in large part.
And I have one more question, and then Steve, I'll throw it to you. But when you say, so the South Carolina Supreme Court has said we're done talking about Abbeville, is there any recourse left? Would we have to try to take that out to our federal court?
Two things. I mean, a minimally adequate education is still a constitutional right in the state of South Carolina. If children have that right violated, they could go into court and sue tomorrow. I just want to be crystal clear about that. What I really mean to say is that I fear bringing new facts before a Supreme Court right now, because they might not recognize the case and they might do damage to the old one. So all the most recent Abbeville decision said is the state has made progress. That's sufficient. We're done. I said that was disingenuous in the op-ed that I wrote in the state paper. The data demonstrates that I am correct on that point. So that's where we're at. It's not that there isn't sort of a constitutional obligation or the court has rejected. It's just that I think there's a misconstruing of the facts. I will say, and it's a sad truth, is that in a time of COVID, in some schools we may not be comparing the difference between level 3 quality and level 4 quality, but rather an absence of access at all. And so there is, and this is one of the things I was testified about during the voucher litigation at the trial level, was that we don't have enough money to put plexiglass up. If our schools don't have enough money to fumigate or whatever it is that they're doing, if they don't have enough money to buy a mask, then that is a prima facie absolute violation in my mind. And we don't have to get into all this sort of, differences in quality issues. So, I hope our schools get the support that they need, such that no one would need to bring, that type of case. But, I know that, I've heard and know that, there are schools that do not have what they need.
Yeah, this makes me think of like a recurring theme in the book that really struck me, is the idea that almost every state constitution makes the state the primary, have the primary responsibility for public education. And I know that growing up in South Carolina and teaching here, it's always felt like the state has always thrown it to this idea of local control. And I just wonder if you have any thoughts on it. Kind of is building on what Nicole's saying, but how do we combat that idea that it's not our problem, as the legislature will take all your money away, but when it comes to fixing anything, it's local control? Or if it comes to underfunding, it's always local responsibility. When does it become the state's responsibility to step in and even if it is in fact true that a district is mismanaging funds, like how do we get it back to that idea of the constitutional responsibility resting with the state and not with local?
Yeah, I mean, that's a good question. I mean, my short answer is the state rests, constitutional responsibility rests with the state 6 ways to Sunday. That is the truth. Now, what we saw in that last substantive Abbeville decision was this sort of district blaming. And I think it's a little bit of lack of clarity and thinking by some of the people writing that opinion. I think the Kentucky, which is no sort of, bastion of liberalism, but the Kentucky Supreme Court clearly understands this issue. The Kentucky Supreme Court said, look, it is the legislature's, duty to create a system and a structure of management, of standards, and of capacity to reach those standards, right? And if it hasn't done that, then it's failed on its job. It's not, it's not Abbeville's responsibility to come up with a structure of it. It's no one but the states. And the other thing that I emphasize, in the book is that, and this isn't me, this is sort of constitutions talking, local school districts are nothing but the agents and delegates of the state, right? I mean, Richland County has no authority to operate any public school or to raise any taxes in this state except for those delegated to it by the state of South Carolina. So it's, to put it in, I guess, teachers' terms or sort of adult kids' terms, it's kind of like me saying, son, I really want a swimming pool, and I want you to go out there and dig that pool for me and have it done by Friday. And when that pool is not ready and functioning and got chlorine on it on Friday, being mad at him, right? Why did I even think this system? And so it's blaming the wrong party. It's passing off one's response. Maybe the pool isn't a good example, but it is passing off the responsibility to someone else and then blaming them. And, most of our state constitutions and most of our state Supreme Courts have been pretty good about not getting trapped in this idea of district blaming. I mean, I don't know how much I talk about it in the book, but there's a lot of this stuff in the cases. It's like, you can't blame the district. If they are a problem, it's your job to fix the problem, which I think is what you're getting at, Steve. But the South Carolina's Abbeville, opinion was not as lucid on that point as maybe as it should have been.
Yeah, and it also kind of brings me to a related question, because you talk about how following the Civil War, one of the ideas of a lot of these new constitutions was to make sure that the superintendent was sort of separate from political or regional. You said they would not be wedded to any geographic or political constituency. And it just made me wonder what your thoughts were about this 2018 attempt to make the state superintendent be an appointed position. Is that like a part of a bigger plan?
I think that personally, I think that's a terrible idea. I will tell you, I have, close friends who are committed to public education that disagree with me on that. And, so I guess I'll just lay out both sides. I mean, the one side is like, look, we ought to have professionals who are schooled and selected and trained for these positions and do them. And, I have a friend, and her husband has been the state superintendent of 2 different states, right? He's a professional in this area. So there is something to be said for professionals, running these systems. At the same time, you're looking further than Betsy DeVos and say, just because the governor gets to pick somebody that's going to make sure they're professional. Obviously that logic is flawed. But what I say, and I think I was proven correct this summer, and I know I was proven correct this summer, is that, the state superintendent and whether that position is appointed or a constitutional officer matters most in moments of crisis. And you know, we can argue during good times, well, I really wish that we had a appointed professional or whatever. But, you know, this summer I said, look, the governor wanted to open the schools. He wanted to do what, you know, Betsy DeVos and President Trump had asked of him and other schools. And, you know, I didn't talk directly to Molly, but I've talked to lots of people who I think talk to Molly. And I said, the thing that she has to understand, I give her tremendous credit on this issue. I said, the thing she has to understand is that, and I think it was in a paper that quoted me on this. I said, she is a constitutional officer and she answers to no one. And on these questions, the governor is not her boss. He is not her superior. He is not even her equal. And she has the authority vested in her by our Constitution and the voters to do what she thinks is right. And she stood up to him, and credit for her. And she's not that, you know, whether you like her or don't like her for other things, that constitutional moment shined through. And I'll point to Indiana, you know, Mike Pence's old stomping grounds. You know, the state super, he was mad when he was governor that the state superintendent was opposing vouchers. And so he tried to force some stuff and take some power away from her. And the Supreme Court stopped in and said, you know, Governor, you lack that authority. Those powers are vested in the state superintendent. So in these moments of crisis, it is incredibly important that we have a constitutionally independent state superintendent. And other times, you know, we could make arguments that maybe it'd be better some other way. But I always say, look, constitutions are for when the chips are down, not for when everyone's going well. So I'm a constitutional officer guy all the way on this question.
I agree. I think we were all, I think I can say that SC for Ed was pretty firmly against that becoming an appointed position. And as much as I think politics have gotten involved in reopening, I can only imagine what it would be if that was an officer that the governor could just remove. That would be terrible right now. So I agree. I know that we got some questions in the Facebook live chat about where people can get the book, which is nice of them.
Yeah, that is nice. Well, first of all, you know, I'm sure a lot of folks got classes to prepare for and papers to grade, so I don't want to interfere with that. But if you're looking for a story to enjoy on the weekend that maybe gives you a broader perspective, you know, it's available, you know, on Amazon, you know, Barnes and Noble, you know, Public Affairs, you know, you can get it from any of those places. So I would say, you know, if you want to make that purchase, I appreciate it. And even if you make a purchase, even if you don't, you know, to ask your library to order it, you know, I think it's important for people to have access to it. And, you know, there's a lot of libraries out there and other places that I've seen have ordered multiple copies. So anyway, you know, the libraries are opening back up, things are on the shelf. So order a copy for yourself and send your library a note and ask them to get one for people who may not be able to afford it.
Yeah, I'm afraid to go to the bookstore, but I got an ebook version from Barnes and Noble. Good decision. It actually is a fast read for a history of a lot of legal movements. I'm not doing it justice. It is like you said, a story more than like a dry political history, although it has a lot of history in it. So I think I read it in 2 weeks. I was surprised that I got to finish it before we did this.
Well, you know, and as to that story, I mean, I've had some of my legal colleagues ask about it. I said, you know, I tried to strip the law out actually as much as possible. And I'll repeat what I've said, you know, throw it, you know, strip out the first 100 pages and throw away the last 100. There's these two center chapters that are about the freedmen. And that story is heavily centered on South Carolina. And that story about how hard they fought to get access to education before slavery was over, and then how hard they fought for it once slavery was over, and how much leadership they showed on that issue here, particularly in the state of South Carolina. It is a story that will change the way you think about public education. In fact, I used it in my part of that story in my testimony to the legislature about 4 years ago, and you know, some commissioner was saying, where's this minimally adequate stuff? Where's all this stuff? Didn't the Supreme Court make up all this stuff? And I said, no, sir, they didn't. I said, if anything, they made a standard that doesn't reflect reality, because if you go back and read what the constitutional delegates were thinking about in 1868, they wanted an education that would ensure that they and their children would forever be members of this democracy and participate in it. So what they wanted was an education that ensured it was fully designed to provide citizenship. And so to the extent that's more than minimally adequate, that's what they wanted. So don't sit there and tell me somehow or another the Supreme Court is making this up just because they want to support education 170, 80 years. I know people fought and died for this idea 100 years ago.
Yeah, that really struck me, the post-Civil War era efforts by African Americans in South Carolina, but it really connects to the 100 years later, and during the Civil Rights Movement, it was also African Americans fighting for what limited labor rights teachers have in this state, and working to have like the labor unions such as they are in South Carolina. And I do think that that is left out. It's always been left out of any history of South Carolina education I've ever heard. So I agree that was a really powerful part. I'm sorry, Nicole.
Oh, that's okay. Derek, when you think about, what you've written and you're thinking about like school choice issues as like a potential crisis, like, do you see this as a crisis in our state? Do you see this as, the fire is starting? Where do you put us at? And then, you said earlier, we're not asking necessarily the right questions. As we try to maybe galvanize people to start speaking more on school choice issues, what are the right questions? Yeah,
well, let me not forget your question as I say one more thing about Steve's, sure. Which is, and I'm probably dangerous to make this offer, but if you're a history teacher out there and you're or you're a social studies teacher and you're looking for a guest visit, I will come to your class, not physically yet, but at least, online. I gave a presentation of parts of this book to my son's elementary school class, and the kids really enjoyed it. I had a lot of great pictures, and I didn't give them the answers. I asked them to think about what people are trying to achieve. So it was a really rich moment to talk through a lot of these stories with young people. And, for those out there listening, feel free to reach out to me. I'd be happy to facilitate that type of conversation.
Well, then, Derek, I got to ask, how do you feel about just really good English teachers?
Well, English too. if you do, it fits neatly with social studies and history.
You can fit everything here.
Yes. But back to your question, Nicole, about sort of where we are in the moment, on vouchers and privatization. I mean, first thing I would say is, the Supreme Court did us a really big favor that went well beyond the Gears Fund issue in this last in this decision yesterday. So, for those following, I know you guys had the momentum to pass a really big voucher bill has been building over the last year and a half, and maybe the organizers of All Out on May missed it, but they had, when they found out you guys were coming, they scheduled a voucher hearing at the last minute the day before it, right? They were sending a signal that like, this is what we want to do. And I think it was sort of only a matter of time until they got the votes in the right size. The Supreme Court decision from yesterday was sufficiently broad on the question of funding private school vouchers that the legislature has to go back to square one. I'm not going to sit here and tell you there aren't other ways that they could do this legally, but the bill that they've been working on for a year and a half is dead on arrival as far as I'm concerned. They cannot move with that and expect they're going to get anywhere. That is my.
Would that be the S556?
Yeah, 556.
Yes.
The education savings account bill.
That's right. That would be I believe it's dead on arrival.
That's currently
structured.
Yeah, I was going to say, Derek, I got to stop you for a minute so I can have a sigh of relief, because that's the best news I've heard all week.
Yes.
Well, it's not to say that they wouldn't pass it anyway, but in my mind, if you're counsel to the legislature, you got to tell them like this is not the way. I'm not trying to help them do their job. So there are ways to do a thing, but I believe that they need to go back to square one given that decision. So I think that's a big deal.
Yeah.
So what would you, that second part of that question, as we're trying to galvanize people, what are the questions they should be asking? Should they be asking those of their state superintendent, their districts, the governor?
Yeah.
Where do we sort of point people?
Well, let me say this, and this is because I think you also, when you raised it earlier, you said we're asking the wrong questions. So much of the debate, right, about vouchers and charters is, are children going to achieve better there, right? Now, the data, I would say, doesn't support that they're doing better. I mean, the national data on charter shows that only about 30% outperform public schools, or 20 to 30%, and the rest of them do the same or worse, right? So it is factually inaccurate to say that charters outperform public schools when you compare apples to apples. And by the same token, national data, Chris Lubianski, you can read his book or read his research, says, look, private schools, if you're talking about value added, they do not outperform public schools. It is true that richer and wealthier and more privileged kids go to private schools, and so you have average scores that are higher. But if those kids were in the public schools, they wouldn't be scoring lower. So what's really happening is your higher scoring kids are just leaving, and they're all in the same place, and they're leaving lower scores behind. So it's not that those schools are giving what I say value added. So, but that's technical, and we can argue about studies, and there are people that say lots of nuances. What I say in the book is those are the wrong questions to ask, because when we formed our public education system, we formed it in the idea that it would reinforce our democratic values, right? It would bring different people together. It would look for common good. It would reach across difference. It would eliminate stigma, right? I mean, that was one of the big problems in the late 1800s, is that we had public schools. They called them pauper schools. The only people who went were poor people. No one else wanted to go. And since no one else wanted to go, no one wanted to fund the pauper schools at an adequate level. And so I think that's another part of this puzzle, right? That no matter what a charter or a voucher does, that's irrelevant. If our public schools become pauper schools once again, history has already shown us that doesn't work, number one. History has also shown us that teaching children of different races in different schools does not work. History has also shown us that excluding students with disabilities from the same opportunities that everyone else is getting does not work. It's shown us the same thing across all of these. It's also shown us that, trying to put education and religion together in one place, in one school, does not bring a community together either, right? Mm-hmm. And so if you accept those principles, which I think are just sort of key principles and democratic principles that are hundreds of years old, then you understand why I say, I don't care how a voucher school does. I don't care what a charter school does. If what they are doing is creating, racial, religious, language status, LGBTQ or disability segregation, then that's a big problem, right? Mm-hmm. If they are separating children from the opportunity to find common good so that we don't see the level of polarization in society, that's a problem, right? So let's just get down to the most basic sort of principle. I mean, our public schools are special because they bring people together. And none of us need to look any further than the list of news channels that regardless of your political persuasion, you could pick when you get off this Facebook to see that we are a divided nation. So the other thing that I say in this is that, ironically, a recommitment to public education is a first step towards our trying to heal these wounds. And to be clear, we have never been perfect in our public schools, and I do not believe we ever will be, at least not in my lifetime. But they have always been part of the solution. They have never been part of the problem. Yeah. We have problems, and our public schools are a key tool of solving them. So that's what I'm talking about in the book when I say, what are those what are the questions to be asking? We've got to talk about student achievement because that's all some people don't care about. But we have to remember, what type of society we're trying to create. and all these other policies you see floating around are really about trying to create a different society. And Betsy DeVos is actually quite explicit about that different type of society herself.
Well, that brings up a question that I think we got on the Facebook or somewhere, because that, to me, what you just said has been the prevailing argument. I mean, of course, across the country, but also, groups like Palmetto Promise, when they're arguing on behalf of something like the SAFE grants, that's always the argument. We're trying to help these individual kids, and the argument is never how are we going to make a system that is or not even equitable, but a system that's actually supposed to help South Carolina as a state or the nation to have access, for everyone to have access to these things. And someone asked in regards to the vouchers, could it be, I guess they mean a legal, I mean, we know it's a conflict of interest, but could it be considered a legal conflict of interest that we have the executive director of a group like Palmetto Promise as the chair of the Education Oversight Committee?
Well, let me. I mean, I think people have obvious concerns about that. Let me go one step further, though, than I think a lot of people in the state, rightfully so, are concerned about the ethics of that. But let me go one step further, because I talk about this in the book. And this goes back to constitutional. The governor's a constitutional officer too, and so are the legislators, and so is the Supreme Court, and every single one of them have a responsibility to support public education. And so what I talk about in the book is a misordering of interest, not necessarily a conflict, but maybe it is a conflict. I say, look, you cannot do your job as a constitutional officer if you are preferencing private options over public schools. Like, if you have fully done your job to the public schools, I'll sit here and accept the idea that we could have a charter school in South Carolina. I'll sit here and accept the idea that I'd help the governor figure out a legal way to have a savings account. But the Constitution says public education comes first, not second, not third, not fourth. And so what I would say is that every single person in the legislature and every member who works in the governor's office who doesn't have public education as their first priority actually has a conflict of interest.
Yeah.
We only have about 20 minutes left, which is just mind-blowing to me. But so can we sort of switch over and talk about the decision from this week for just a few minutes? Do you mind just sort of giving our audience a quick overview of what the issues were at play and sort of where you fit into it?
Yeah. So, I mean, I'm not all that relevant overall, but I mean, I was the expert witness at the trial that sort of tried to lay out a few facts and a few principles. And then I helped organize the Meeke briefs. There were like 6 or 7 different ones. The South Carolina School Boards Association filed one, Richland County Public Education Partners, Greenville Education Partners, Palmetto Teachers. SCEA was actually a member became a plaintiff in the case as well. We also had the National School Boards Association file a brief, and also Public Funds for Public Schools, which is a coalition on behalf of the Education Law Center in New Jersey, which does work across the nation, the Southern Poverty Law Center, and Munger Tolles, which is a law firm in Los Angeles, California. So a lot of good ideas came into this, and I was just a small piece in it. But so to the case itself, just to make sure everybody's on the same baseline, the CARES Act had 2 chunks of money for education. One was, the education emergency relief, and that just went straight out to public schools. There was litigation around that because Betsy DeVos was trying to give some of it to private schools, but we won 4 cases on that. That's done. There's this other chunk of money that was given to the governor for him to sort of make choices about how to spend on education. So it was the Governor's Education Emergency Relief Act. So Congress gave most of the money, right, through the formula I just talked about, this other smart part for the governor. What I described in my testimony was that this was really what you might call hotspot money, which is like, yeah, we can come up with a formula that generally works across the nation for all 50 states, but every state's got different issues. And even within a state, different counties have different issues. So there's this this pot of money set aside that would allow the governor to make decisions about sort of who has priority needs, basically COVID priority related needs. And Congress said, but just to make sure the governors don't put this in their back pocket or give it to their friends, we'll at least list a few categories. Number one, the governor could just give it to the State Department of Education and let her or him, decide who to give it to. They could just give it to institutions of higher education because there's needs there as well. Or he could just give it straight to school districts themselves if he wanted to, right? So he could have said, I'm going to give this to, Bamberg because they're really hurting, or Calhoun or whatever. And if he didn't give it to those three, it said, or other educational entities. No mention of private schools at all. Clearly sort of this intention that it would meet COVID-related needs. And the governor, even in his application to the federal government, had spelled out all the things he would do to, help train teachers, deal with distance learning. I mean, he had all this public education stuff in his application that he'd filed. And I really think what happened was in that little tussle between, President and DeVos and the states, and then, the governor and Molly Spearman, that I think the governor and DeVos and them sort of threw a temper tantrum and said, well, if you guys aren't going to open, I'm just going to give it to private schools, even though there would have been no mention of it. And there's nothing in the act that says anything about it. So governor, gives, a quarter of the money to HBCUs, and as to K through 12, not a single dollar to public education, every single dollar to this voucher program. Plaintiffs sue in Orangeburg, claiming it violates our state constitution, which within the education article, it says no money to private schools. Yesterday, the Supreme Court said that the structure, they actually said a few things. One, they were, I think, befuddled by the fact that the governor thought he could spend the federal money on this anyway, because it seemed odd. But regardless of what the federal law required, our state constitution says no direct benefit to private schools. He clearly had done that. The money was going to go straight from the state's treasury to private schools, and no student who wasn't attending a private school could touch this money for anything, right? Even though there's plenty of kids and families out there in need. The other issue that was hanging around in that case was whether these actually were quote unquote public funds, since they were federal funds. So there was this question of, well, is it different given that this is federal money? Could the governor argue that this doesn't violate the Constitution there? Maybe there are still some issues hanging around there, but the way that this funds went, the Supreme Court said, look, they're deposited in the state treasury. They don't go anywhere until the governor says that they go there. And if they're not spent, they come back to the state treasury. So these are clearly public funds, even if they initially came from the federal government. So on that basis, they're public funds. They're given directly to private schools. The Supreme Court says this is unconstitutional. You can't do it.
So we had a couple questions the other day about some of the issues. One, why was Palmetto Promise included in the lawsuit? Was it because they were going to distribute the funds?
Well, so, I will tell you, we never got to the bottom of Palmetto Promise in this litigation. It was curious. I guess that's all you could say, no one heard anything about this. And then all of a sudden, one day, the governor, announces it up in Greenville at a press conference. And he announces it with Palmetto Promise right there at the platform. Now, that alone wouldn't necessarily be overly problematic. But on top of that, and this is the curious part, every single bit of information about this program rests on a website that's owned by Palmetto Promise. And so it was really hard for us to wrap our mind around the idea that the government was running a program when there was no government documents. There was no government website. There was no government application portal. It was like Palmetto Promise knew more about this program than a governor did. So we had concerns early on about That actually could have been a violation all by itself without getting into the details. But so we thought, well, maybe, I shouldn't say we, at least I thought, maybe the government, maybe they're giving money to Palmetto Promise and they're doing this. And we kind of thought if they did that, well, we really got them, because that would be a problem under various rules. But then there was an affidavit submitted at trial that said that they received no funds. So apparently they were just, they were doing all this for free, which is not unimaginable. I mean, their constituency would benefit, or they were smart enough not to take a check in advance, and that's probably what it is. So, I mean, there could be other things there. I think there still are lots of questions that we deserve answers to, or at least I would like to have answers to, which is, was this ever the governor's idea to begin with? Or was this like Palmetto Promise did it and handed it off to him? And this sort of comes back to issues that Steve was raising about, who's serving who, on commissions and whatnot. But, when they said that they didn't get the money, or they didn't get any money, the only issue then I think that this sort of took it off the table a little bit, just because we couldn't see behind the veil. I mean, there could be other problems behind the veil, but we couldn't see behind it at the end of the day. So, and there was a lack of transparency. I mean, that's the short answer, is like, no one knows anything except for Palmetto Promise. And if they're the only ones in the state that knows anything, it seems like they ought to be a defendant, but so that's sort of how they got into the case, but they ultimately, got out of it as well.
That makes sense.
Well, that kind of leads to another question that was in the chat, which I don't know that you necessarily would have any special knowledge about, but it's just kind of in the same theme. Someone wanted to know about Coalition for Kids and their relationship to SC school boards.
Yeah, I mean, I guess I've been hearing some stuff about that lately. Let me just say one thing. I have heard, and I can't confirm nor deny, I've heard many a rumor, although I wouldn't really call them rumor. I have been told by people who, I've heard many stories about the flowing of funds into Palmetto Promise that reaches actually right back to Betsy DeVos herself. I've heard her foundations. I've heard the same thing about the legal organization that represented Palmetto Promise. That's ultimately sort of substantial funds from Betsy DeVos. Look, we can spend our money where we want to if we have any to spend. And so I'm not going to say Betsy DeVos can't do that, but it does raise questions about, public officials playing both sides of the fence. It's sort of like they're taking one public position and then funding private individuals to sort of help them achieve their goals. I mean, that seems icky to me. Is that legal? I don't know. I'm not a campaign finance guy. I've heard similar things about school boards and private organizations here that are receiving enormous or substantial sums of money to try to flip school boards so that they support these things. I'll give you this short answer. I don't know enough about the money trail in South Carolina to sit here and give you firm answers. What I do know, though, is that in Denver, Colorado, which had a tremendous growth in charter schools, that there were millions of dollars spent on school board races and in those areas or in those suburbs. And so a huge narrative around, like, who in the world ever spends $1 million on a school board race, right? And then in Raleigh, North Carolina, if there's any folks from North Carolina that might happen to be joining us, they have had over segregation issues, tremendous amount of school board turnover there, particularly around 2012, 10, 12, 13, 14. And there was a lot of indications that those folks were being funded by, out of state sort of libertarian groups as well. So short story, all I can tell is there's plenty of evidence out there that libertarian and sort of small government type sort of ideology groups have begun investing in school board races. Whether they're doing that here in South Carolina, I don't know, but there's a lot of people who believe that to be the case.
That's interesting. Another question from the chat. So from Charleston County, We have a few public-private partnership schools, and there's little to no accountability or transparency. Why is this allowed under law when public funds are given to private entities based on student enrollment?
Yeah, I mean, I'll just say I'm looking at that issue right now, trying to get my head around it. And let me give you the sort of the shortest answer I can, which is when charter schools first were thought up, or at least coming into creation in places like California, there were a set of arguments about how charter schools violated the state constitutional structure because they removed educational accountability and put it outside of the state superintendent's authority. They put it outside of the voters' authority at the state level and, local folks, right? So that now what we have is these things that are supposedly public, but they're operating outside the system. And, in one or two states that was successful. That type of idea and argument succeeded in Washington, but it did not succeed in California, for instance. And the court said, well, yeah, this doesn't really look like the way you run a public education system. And maybe it isn't a public education system, but the state is allowed to experiment so long as they still have a public education system. And I think a lot of folks, including myself, sort of slept on charter schools for a while and sort of said, well, okay, they're small, not that big of a deal. And it's not until they get to sort of large size that they start creating serious problems. And now you're like, the beast has been unleashed and we can't catch it again. And so as these public-private partnerships, the thing that I am trying to think about, I don't have answers, is number one, I got fooled, I'll admit, on the danger of charter schools, or at least wasn't paying enough attention, 15, 20 years ago. And the question is, are these private-public partnerships another version of charter schools that could become this, Goliath that we're going to be fighting 10 years from now? If so, we need to have our antennas up now. We need to be opposing them now. But I just can't speak confidently as to what they are. I know local communities are concerned about them, and I'm trying to catch up and get up to the speed with those local communities right now and figure it out for myself. But I know the local communities think that they are just another iteration of charter schools, but maybe worse.
So right now, ultimately, it is probably legal.
Well, let me say we have to separate the question from we have to separate authorized under state statute from constitutional, right?
Okay.
So, the state does lots of stuff that gets later determined unconstitutional. What I'm really saying is, yes, the state has a statute, as I understand it, that authorizes one public-private partnership in each school district. Since it's only one, I'll be honest, I haven't spent a lot of time thinking about it, but I do know that with the last reform bill, they wanted to expand and make it possible to have more of them.
Yeah.
And so, they may very well pass a law. And so, yes, it will be statutorily authorized. The thing I'm trying to think through is there a constitutional problem with that? And I don't have an answer to that yet.
Makes sense.
So in other words, a lot of these things are illegal until someone takes it to court.
Yeah, I mean, I guess you're going to say is that they are statutorily authorized until someone demonstrates they violate the Constitution or that some other law prohibits them. And just to give you a perfect example, or to be clear about what I'm talking about, the state of Washington 5-6 years ago passed a new charter bill to dramatically expand the number of charter schools and to fund them out of the Common School Fund, right? The thing that funds all of the other public schools. So at that moment in time, there were charter schools, they were getting, public school funds. Someone sued, and, the Supreme Court of Washington said, well, actually, the Constitution does not authorize the legislature to take money out of the Common School Fund and give it to charter schools. So what I'm saying here is, is there any theory by which you could say the Constitution does not permit the legislature to do that? And I don't know the answer to that yet.
So moving back towards this week's decision, I told you earlier we were going to ask about what are the grounds. We've already been told by the governor that he plans to appeal. So what would be the grounds by which he could potentially appeal?
Yeah, I was chatting with someone about that earlier, and I think I told you I haven't been following what the governor said. He's like, "We won, that's it, over, done with." You can't appeal a state constitutional issue to the federal court. So like, there's nothing there. Someone said, "Well, what about supremacy?" Like the governor's, I think he's confused about the supremacy clause and when it applies and when it doesn't. And I don't want to, put people to sleep before this thing is over, but I'll just tell you the supremacy clause is not an issue in this case. It has no bearing. I think the governor was trying to confuse the court on that issue, and so it didn't get confused. So there is no federal issue there. He could petition for rehearing. I haven't looked at the Supreme Court rules. In the same way that people who get convicted of crimes can ask the court to overrule the jury. This is a 5-0 decision. I don't see how people, he's going to get 3 out of 5 people who ruled that this was unconstitutional go, oh yeah, I guess you're right. Actually, it's okay for you to do this. So I don't have any concerns about this issue personally.
Do you think we can sigh of relief?
I mean, I don't think it's worth. I mean, politicians do crazy. They say stuff. They don't want to admit that. I mean, maybe another way to read this is like, he got punched in the face so hard yesterday. Like the referee said, "You're out, right? Yeah. Down for 10." And in the post conference, the post conference debrief, it's hard to say. I mean, Jamie Harrison, in the debate with Lindsay the other day said, be a man. You can say be a woman too. I don't think it's exclusively, but be a man or be a woman and just tell the truth. Well, some people don't want to be man enough, excuse my language, to say, I just got my ass kicked. So instead of saying that, he says, well, we're still fighting. We're going to do this, we're going to do that. And just kind of hope the story goes away. And I'm not trying to be like hostile to Governor McMaster's, but I don't understand that other than just like PR to just make people nervous or make supporters go, he's still fighting for it. There's nothing left. I don't see that there's anything there for him. But I don't know everything. Maybe I'm missing something, but I just don't see it.
Well, and a lot of his friends would lose some contributions if they thought that. You don't have to say anything about that. That's me speculating.
I don't know. Yeah, I mean, it's like the people just, I don't know. I don't see anything there for him. I don't have anything to add. Knock out, counted to 10, it's over. Give them some smell.
So
give them some smelling salts.
Yeah, we did have a question in the chat wondering, how does, and I don't know this, how does this work? Does the governor already have like that team of attorneys? Does he have to hire a special team for these kinds of proceedings? Because people are wondering how much of our taxpayer dollars went to the legal fees associated with it.
Yeah, so I can't remember. I have to go back and look as to see whether they had any outside counsel. I can tell you that governors always have the ability to hire outside counsel. Just a small funny story. Bobby Jindal. Bobby Jindal's office hired me as an expert in a lawsuit against, the U.S. Department of Education, and they hired private counsel to do that. And just to let you know, I do try to see things from both sides. I did tell them, I said, look, are you sure he wants to hire me? I said, because we don't agree on much. I said, we agree on one thing, but if they ask any questions about anything other than that, the governor is not going to like what I have to say. They said, no, that's why we want you. I said, okay, fine. But anyway, so I have some vague recollection. There may have been maybe one private attorney that had helped on the case, but primarily it was counsel for the governor. Actually, one of my former students, Thomas Limehouse, was arguing the case there in the Supreme Court. And he was also lead counsel there at trial level. And there were lots of state attorneys there. So when you look at that, what you really say is, just like with any business, I'm sure there's other cases to be dealt with. And so you are assigning people to work on this case rather than another case, which could mean that you have to hire somebody else to do another case, So, but directly speaking, I would say that it looked like to me 95 to 100% of the work was done by state employees and the Attorney General's office and stuff. So that's still a use of taxpayer dollars, but I don't think it was additional expenses.
But that would have been in the regular course of business anyway, and so not accumulating new.
That's right. Although, to be fair, those attorneys could have been out enforcing people's right to vote and other things instead of doing that too. So, I mean, it is always, anytime you do, as we all know, if you're teaching Spanish, you're not teaching French. It's not to say Spanish is bad, but if you're teaching Spanish, you're not teaching French.
That's right. That's right. Well, Derek, the last question on my list, going back to this lawsuit, I mentioned to you before we got on, people were sort of asking about the idea of stand to sue argument, who was allowed to, who wasn't. And so, we know out there that people have concerns about a lot of things related to COVID with PPE and are wondering.
Yeah. So let me try to give some straight talk on that. So there was a lot of problem with standing, or a lot of questions, I should say, about standing. It was the only plaintiff was Miss Adams, and she wasn't a current teacher. She didn't have kids in the school, at least to my knowledge, didn't have kids in the school. So her connection to the case was, I'm fine with it. I'm just saying, like, she would not be what you would call your prototypical plaintiff, right? The Teachers Association was not involved there either. So there was this question early on as to who is the best plaintiff. Maybe the reason is like, who's the best plaintiff? And my position was the best plaintiff actually would have been a school district, right? Because they would have been the ones that would have otherwise, probably gotten the money, would have been a school district. Anyone who's been around South Carolina long enough knows that a lot of our school districts are rightfully or wrongfully scared of state power. And it's always been difficult for state superintendents and school districts to stand up against the state. So, but eventually, we did get Orangeburg, I believe it was. So that was a big plus. But at least on day one, when the case was filed, we did not have a school district. We did not have a teachers association. We didn't have all that. It was just Miss Adams. And so that raised questions about whether she was a proper party, an injured party. What was the injury that she suffered? By the time the case moved forward, we added, a school district, we added, the SEA. Now we had good plaintiffs. So I don't really think we had an issue with standing at that point. But because when we started off, we only had Miss Adams, we also argued this public importance standing, which said, well, you don't have to be the kind of the perfect or prototypical plaintiff. This is so important, anybody ought to be able to do it. And by the time it finally gets to the Supreme Court sort of said, paid no attention to who Miss Adams was, or SEA or Orangeburg or any of that, and just says, wait a minute, this is such an important issue. We're going to decide on it anyway. But when you get to other types of cases, which is, I guess, what the person is asking about, that maybe don't rise to that sort of statewide, state level importance, you have to have standing. And the simplest way to explain that is to say that you have to be the injured party. It's not enough to just be mad about a thing. You have to be an injured party. So a parent, right, of a child is an injured party in terms of the quality of education or the safety of the school. A teacher could be an injured party as well. A school district could be an injured party. So, again, it depends on, what is the complaint that the listeners are worried about. But standing is, depending on the claim, most likely not an issue for teachers and students out there. We'll just put it that way.
Okay. That's it for me. Steve, did you have any other questions on your side?
I do. I don't really have a question, but I do want to give you a chance to just briefly kind of touch, because a lot of what we've talked about is, about all these threats, but I was really struck by, I don't know if I would call it optimism at the end, but sort of a looking forward to seeing education as being a resilient institution that you feel like is going to at some point overcome
Yeah.
these difficulties. So it'd be nice to leave people with a little bit of
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I'll give a caveat, and then I'll give you the good closing. The caveat is I always tell folks that I am that guy who will swear up and down that the glass is 3/4 full when it's damn near bone dry. So I'm just one of those guys, and so maybe take it with a grain of salt. With that said, I did find a lot of reasons to be optimistic as I looked beyond myself, beyond our current circumstances. And the two instances that gave, well, I should say three. I mean, three things that give me optimism. One is that we have always moved forward on public education. There has never been a moment in history, and we've had blips, but if you look at the overall, like if you're looking at the stock market, whatever, like it has always been up when we're talking about public education. That the nation has always expanded its commitment. It has never went back. To be clear, right now we are talking about going backwards, but we've never gone fully backwards on public ed. That's number one. The other two things relate to the darkest moments in our history. And two of the darkest moments in our history are at the end of Reconstruction, when former slaveholders want to reduce African Americans to second-class citizenship, if not slavery itself. And the other second darkest moment, at least in this conversation, is after Brown versus Board of Education has been won, and a few other cases I talk about, where the South tries to resist, sort of the massive resistance movement, right? And so those are certainly tremendously scary moments for African Americans, and they ought to be scary moments for whites and Latinos and others as well, although there weren't many Latinos at that moment. And what I say is there's this silver thread that runs through that story, even in our darkest moments, that in the Mississippi Constitutional Convention, when they are saying we have come here to do one thing and one thing only, and it is to disenfranchise Black folks, to eliminate their citizenship. And as they're going for that, you have people stand up and say, we want to remove public education from the Constitution, right? And there's a segregationist leader that comes to the fore and says, that's a bridge too far. We're not going to do that. We'll segregate the schools. We'll defund African American schools, but we're not going to take away education from African American, public education from African Americans or whites. And that's an important moment, right? That idea of public education in a South that had never had it before said, you know what? We may be as bigoted as can be, but we want to keep public education. That's an important thing to recognize. And I point out in the book that in the years following, the white power brokers realized that they'd taken too much money out of public education and tried to get some of it back in, right? And so again, the strength of that idea. Fast forward to the backlash in the modern civil rights movement, and the state of Virginia passes legislation that allows every school district in the state to close its schools and voucherize education. The Supreme Court strikes down the voucher idea, and so for unique reasons there. And so, as I say, primarily white suburban women of people of power in the capital of Richmond say, if our choice is between no public education and segregated education, we'll take, I should say, desegregated education. We'll take desegregation over the end of public education. Those are powerful moments that racism itself was not enough to end public education. And so I say to myself, why is that? Well, it's because of what public education means to our democracy, that, yeah, you can use race to manipulate and go after it, but it survives. And if it can survive that, it ought to be able to survive these fools running around now. The past is no prediction of the future, but there is something about public education that has resonated with the people of this country for over 200 years to make us the more perfect union that we want to be. And because I'm the optimistic guy, I believe that regular people still want that.
Yeah.
And I believe regular people still fight for that. And for the 10,000 of you that showed up on the state house steps, how could you believe anything other than that? And so make your voices heard, put your feet on the street when it becomes safe to do so again. And we're going to get there. We're going to get there.
Thank you.
Derek, we really appreciate your time tonight. I know you said earlier, no, it was great for me, but this has been really wonderful. The audience has really seemed to enjoy it. For those of you who kind of came in late, Derek has written an excellent book called Schoolhouse Burning that is available on Amazon, we've heard. And Derek wants to put a plug in for that. Local libraries getting copies. So hopefully it will be out there. And we'd love to have you on again sometime. If you've got time in your schedule. I think this has been really meaningful.
I'd love to. And like I said, I don't want to bore, but I was just say, happy to give sort of a preview. We didn't really talk that much about the South Carolina history tonight. We didn't get to it. We're talking about the big issues, but for those history and social and English teachers, there's a lot of red meat in there that I think is worth sharing with your students. There was a Spartanburg teacher. I can't recall his name at the moment right now, but he tweeted at me a week or so ago and said, he was sharing some of it with his students. So, this is, I'm not trying to sell the book, but there's stuff in here to share with children to help us in that commerce going on again. But, as the president says, claims that you guys are teaching leftist, ideology and teaching people to hate America. I said, look, this book has got a lot of stories about our warts, but if you read it, it teaches you to love America, teach you to love South Carolina, not hate it, right? That our country is great because the people who have fought to make it better. And so, there's a lot of good stuff in there. I think that the kids can sink their teeth into as well.
Yeah. As an AP Lang teacher, I'll say it would be a great AP Lang book for the 10 AP Lang teachers that are out there. Pick it up.
Yeah.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you, Derek. And good night out there, Facebook. Thank you for joining us. We appreciate having you, and we hope that you are safe and well and are ready to enjoy a relaxing weekend. Try to spend 5 minutes doing something that you love and recharge. Good night.
Thanks. Hey, stay at it, folks.
Thank you.